Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's your boy, it's your host, Steezy A, checking in and in the building. Welcome back to another edition of On Beat, brought to you by the 32-Bit Network. Today we are going to be featuring the Arizona Cardinals, and I am not doing this alone. We have a returning BIG on the show today. And for those of you guys that need a reminder, that stands for a very important guest, none other than Mr. Cardinal himself, Darren Urban. How are you doing, Darren?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. It's been a couple years since the last time we talked, and I don't know why I didn't know this a couple of years ago, but I did see this in your bio. It's been a couple of months, so consider this old news, but your birthday, August 31st, that stands out to me because my mom, who I love dearly more than anything in this world, has the same birthday. And so I just wanted to say happy belated. And again, I know it was a couple months ago, but I hope you had the best birthday.
I did have a good birthday. It's funny that you bring up my birthday in terms of talking about the Cardinals because Larry Fitzgerald happens to be born on August 31st. So that was always something that we kind of joked about how we shared the same birthday. He likes to joke that I'm like 20 years older than him, which I am not. Uh, but I am significantly older than Fitz. So
Darren, not to hop on the old joke train, I just thought this was a fun fact, but you're in your 25th season covering the Arizona Cardinals, and I'm the same age as the amount of time that you've been covering the Arizona Cardinals, and I just find that fascinating. I mean, you've been doing this for such a long time. It's been a couple years since the last time we talked. I mean, what I want to ask is it the passion that's driving the duration of your career, if that's the best way to put it?
yeah, I think for me, I mean, this something along these lines was always something I wanted to do. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that back in the day, it was about writing for a newspaper, and that's how I got into this business, and that's how I started covering the Cardinals was for a newspaper. But this was something that I'd wanted to do since I was like 9 years old, write about sports. It's obviously morphed quite a bit over the years, and my duties, while it includes a lot of writing right now, has expanded well beyond that in a lot of ways. And outside of sports, I manage some people in the organization, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, there are times when it's gotten repetitive maybe, and there are times when you wonder about some stuff, like maybe it would be maybe you think about doing something else, but in the end, uh, whenever I kind of get to one of those places, I think to myself, how many people have told me over the years how much they'd kill to be doing what I'm doing, and I do appreciate that greatly, is that I'm doing something that a vast number of people would love to be able to do and earn money from it, and I'm lucky enough to be one of those people.
Right. And I mean, I've been following your work for the last couple of years now. And, I love what I see every single time out. And so, it's always a pleasure to have you on here. Darren, just to kind of transition over to the Arizona Cardinals now, they're 6-4. First place in the NFC West, riding a 4-game winning streak. They haven't allowed a touchdown in 2 weeks. And by the time they play next weekend, it would be 3 weeks since the last time they've allowed a touchdown. Darren, talk to me. Even the most optimistic fan, did they expect this?
When you're talking about the defense, and I have a piece going up tomorrow about kind of the things that we've learned about this team over the first 10 games. And one of them is that this defense is greater than the sum of its parts. And look, they don't have a lot of star power on defense. Most people know Buda Baker. Beyond that, not a lot of people are going to recognize the names. And it took them a while to get together, and they've dealt with some injuries. And I don't think anybody's going to confuse them necessarily with the 2000 Baltimore Ravens, but they play the defense that Nick Rallis has put together well. For instance, he's a guy that, for all the people that talk here about getting a high level pass rusher, a big name to come off the edge, I'm sure they wouldn't turn that person down. But at the same time, Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis like to use a rotation both on the edge and on the defensive line. And that means something. And if you have one guy who's going to eat up a bunch of snaps, does he fit as well in what you want to do? I don't know. But I know that this defense And again, there's been a couple times they played offenses that aren't the best offenses. The Jets and the Bears, the last two games, don't have the best offenses. But if they were as poor on defense as some people said they were going to be, they still wouldn't be putting up the kind of numbers they are right now. And they're playing really well. And when you pair that with how the offense has come along and gotten to a higher level, that equates to wins. And so it'll be fascinating to see over this last 7-game stretch if they can continue that. But there's a lot of confidence right now in what they're doing is going to continue to work.
Right. And speaking of the defense, you touched on him, Budda Baker, who was second in the entire NFL in total tackles with 100, which is crazy for a safety. What's even crazier is the fact that he requested a trade back in April of last year. And to see the team rolling in the manner that they have been throughout the course of this season, I think I saw this early this morning, but ESPN NFL insider Jeremy Fowler talked about how he's been in talks with some people around the organization, and he believes that Budda Baker and the Arizona Cardinals can potentially come to an agreement on a contract extension before free agency. And so, Darren, I want to ask you, do you share those same sentiments?
Well, Jeremy might be talking to more people than necessarily I will know. I think from where my perspective is, do I think they would like to keep Budda Baker? I don't think there's any question about that. Now, whether and we talk about this all the time with any free agent, and it sounds so obvious, but I always feel like it needs to be remembered, which is a team wanting to keep a player and a player wanting to stay there is only the very first part of how that extension might work. The money is a huge part of it. The Cardinals might absolutely want to keep Budda. The question is what Budda can get on the open market, how it compares to what the Cardinals are willing to give him. And if there's a difference, if Budda's willing to give some to stay in a situation that he knows he benefits greatly from, and he is playing one of his better seasons right now. Whatever they're letting him do, it's been really good. And I'm not trying to throw any cold water on the idea that he stays. I actually think what I just said plays into the idea that they might keep him. I mean, there's been a lot of teeth, and I know Budda said what he said a couple of years ago. There was a lot of stuff going on. There was a new coach, didn't know what was going to happen. Since then, I think he loves what Nick Rollis does. I think he loves what Jonathan Gannon is doing. Budda's one of those players that he's been here a long time, and other than 2021, he's had to deal with a lot of losing, and he's not a player that deals with that well, and that's a good thing. And I don't know if he'd want to walk away from it now that it's just turning around. So I'm hopeful that Budda stays around. I think he's one of those guys that not only gives you a ton on the field, he gives you a ton off the field. And as young as this team is, you love to have a guy like that around. And I'd like to think that they can come to a meeting of the minds. I'm a huge Budda fan, have been since he showed up. He is everything you want in a teammate and a player. And again, sometimes business gets in the way, so I try not to get over my skis on that stuff. If a player has something better that he can get somewhere else, I'm certainly wouldn't be somebody to frown upon that. And I understand why decisions are made on both sides over what a contract might be. So that's kind of how I look at the whole thing.
And I think you're looking at it from the perfect lens. I mean, Budda himself said it, like, this is a business first and it changes from year to year. That's not verbatim, right? I'm just paraphrasing what he said. And it's funny that you say you're a big fan of Budda, because as a Seattle native, I'm an even bigger fan of Budda. I mean, watching him, I have friends that played football with and against him in high school and college. And so, just hearing all the stories, watching them from back in the day, it's lovely seeing somebody from where you grew up, having this much success. And so to see him potentially up for a big payday, I mean, I couldn't be any happier for him or his family. Darren, not to spend too much time on Budda, because I do want to move on, and I don't like playing the what if game, but I saw on Over the Cap, and you retweeted this on Twitter, or on X, I should say, the Arizona Cardinals entering next offseason are projected to have the second most cap space in the NFL with over $101 million. And so let's say Budda is asking to be the highest paid safety in the game with that much cap space at their disposal. Do you think the Cardinals would be willing to pay him that much?
Again, it's hard for me to say exactly what they're thinking. You got a couple things involved here. One, any contract that he's going to sign now, since he's coming to the end of this one, is going to be able to be structured however they want it. So if they want to backload it, so that they don't spend as much cap room early. They can do that, or vice versa if they want to front load it. I don't know what's going to happen with Buddha. I know with him being in the league as long as he has been, I don't know. And this, again, I don't know anything. This is my pure, having watched the league for a number of years. Would they be willing to make him the highest paid safety in the league? I don't know about that, but I'm not 100% sure that's what Buddha's looking for either. I think he wants to be paid fairly, and this would be his third contract. He did get a big extension once already, and it's kind of funny to be in this because they did draft Robert Taylor Demerson, who is looking pretty good as a 4th-round pick. And I think in a perfect world, they have 3 safeties that they can lean on because I think that's how Nick Rollis likes to play. But when Buddha was drafted, they had Tyrann Mathieu here. And this was a similar situation. Tyrann had a contract situation that got kind of jumbled. And when it was all said and done, Tyrann did what was best for him, and they had Buddha to step in. So this team is positioned that if Buddha decides here is not the place for him, they have a way to work with that, and that's how it goes. But to your original question, again, I don't know if Buddha's going to be looking to be the highest paid anything. I think he's going to want to be paid fairly, and I think if his contract is up there, I think that works. And I think because of the cap space you talked about, I think they have a lot of flexibility in which to be able to do whatever they want.
Right. And we talked about the heart and soul of the defense in Buddha Baker. I want to talk about just briefly the heart and soul of the offense. Running back James Conner, who's having a phenomenal year. I have on a bunch of my fantasy teams, and so I could attest to a degree. He's also a free agent, but as you know, obviously, the Arizona Cardinals drafted rookie Trey Benson pretty early in the draft this past season. Do you foresee a scenario in which James Conner is re-signed, and then as the years progress on that contract, him being in a timeshare with the Trey Benson? I mean, he's showing a lot of talent this year.
I will say this about James Conner. One, I think he stays with the Cardinals. He had a very reasonable ask for his contract the last time they re-signed him. I don't think that's necessarily going to change. I think he knows this is a really good place for him, and I think this team very much understands his value. I think despite his age, I think he's done a remarkable job of making sure his body is in the right place. I mean, he's got a bigger workload now than he ever has had. He's playing better than he ever has. Now, again, you have to be wary of running back, approaching 30, all those things. But again, when you talk about a guy who has very much embraced what Jonathan Gannon has brought to the team and how the team is right now and winning with his team and bonding with Kyler Murray, that's James Conner. So it's easy to fall into this trap right now because they're playing well and they all seem to be. But like Buddha, I think James Conner sticks around. You never know what's going to happen in the offseason. And I think Monty Ossenfort has a really good handle on dealing with a roster and turnover and when to move on. And he did spend a lot of years in New England that were very much about that. So I'm never going to say never about any scenario, but I think James Conner sticks around.
All right. Well, I want to touch on, I don't know if this is your latest article, but you wrote a piece following the Cardinals' annihilation of the Jets. And in that piece, this isn't verbatim, right? But you talked about how several media members that you've talked to or you've heard from talked about Kyler Murray potentially joining that MVP race. And so as things stand right now, would you put him in the top 10 of a potential MVP race?
I mean, if we're talking top 10, I would. Again, without knowing off the top, I'm not somebody who really delves into, hey, who should be MVP, especially 10 or 11 weeks in. And I do think, I think these things in general about MVP, you got to have a really good season as a team, and you've got to have a pretty good season statistically. They have the possibility of having a really good season as a team. I think his statistics waver a little bit because they don't all, like against the Bears, he had a very pedestrian statistical game, played very well, but had a pedestrian statistical game. So I think that could muddy the waters a little bit. I mean, if you look, and I'm just pulling a name out here, but if the Baltimore Ravens win 12 or 13 games, and Lamar Jackson keeps putting up the numbers he's going to win MVP. And that's not because Kyler played any worse than him necessarily, but that's what's going to get the attention. Now, if this team somehow in their last 7 games wins 6 of them, or even 5, and comes out of nowhere, he's going to have a really strong argument. If this team wins 10 games overall and pulls out the division or is a wild card, it's still going to be a little bit harder, because of, I don't think his numbers are going to be eye popping per se, because they have a running game the way they play and all those things. So I will say this: I think Kyler is playing excellent football. I think overall, with the way he plays mentally and the way he is in the locker room and the way he's actually playing physically, and now he's totally back from the knee, I think it's the best football he's played in his career. Whether or not the numbers necessarily say that, I believe that. And I think that should be taken into account. But again, if you're a voter in Cincinnati, are you going to be paying that close of attention to the nuance of Kyler Murray? Maybe not. And I understand that.
Right. And it's interesting that you bring up that parallel to Lamar Jackson, because a lot of people felt that last year statistically wasn't even his best season statistically if you're looking at his resume and what he's done in his career so far. But because the Ravens were so successful in the regular season, and maybe this is to his detriment statistically, but the running game in Baltimore last year was one of the best. The defense was obviously one of the best. And because they had so much team success, he was the best player on that team. And he ended up winning MVP because of it. And so I'm kind of with you. If the Arizona Cardinals win this division, if they could enter, the playoffs as a potential number 2, 3, even a 4 seed, I think Kyler could have a significant case. Another guy I want to talk about, though, before we do wrap things up here in a couple of minutes, Marvin Harrison Jr., right? His insane work ethic has been talked about. A lot of us have kind of read into that. I read an ESPN article about how he catches 200 balls before practice on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Saturdays, and then after practice on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And so obviously that's there. The talent is there, the pedigree and all that. But we do have a lot of fantasy football owners that tune in. And so, Darren, I have to ask, I already kind of know the answer myself, but to everybody that's out there that, that will tune in, when will the production start to follow when it comes to Marvin Harrison Jr. and what he's putting up statistically?
If you're talking about a guy that's going to make 8 catches for 100 yards every week, I don't know if it's going to necessarily be this season. And quite frankly, with the way this team is, I'm not even 100% sure that's going to be his role with this coaching staff. I think there's a lot that goes into play here. Well, number one, I think Marvin Harrison had a learning curve, and that showed up tremendously the first month or so of the season. I think he's in a much better place. With both the speed and the physicality of the game, having to catch the ball in traffic sometimes, knowing you might get hit, all these things. But right now, and Jonathan Gannon even kind of said it the other day, like the passing game starts with Trey McBride. And that could eventually move over to Marvin when he's got a little bit more experience. But right now, Trey McBride is the number 1 guy, and that's clear. And then Marvin is a piece. And when you talk about a team that wants to run the ball first in the first place, that when you start talking about statistics and numbers, it was funny in the offseason. You can go find me on our podcast a couple of 3 times at least. I mentioned the fact that I wasn't even 100% sure he was going to reach 1,000 yards this year, and it was nothing that I knew, but I wouldn't have been surprised. Again, a lifetime ago. But in a different NFL. But Larry Fitzgerald had 780 yards as a rookie, and he turned out pretty good. Jerry Rice, I think, was under 1,000 yards as a rookie. Don't remember that off the top of my head. But so again, I think assuming that he's not putting up Jamar Chase rookie numbers or Justin Jefferson rookie numbers, and assuming he's a lesser receiver for the long term, I think is a huge mistake. I love Marvin's work ethic. I love his attitude. I think he will eventually get there. I think he's on the right team to get there. He's surrounded by the right, I hate to use the word, but he's surrounded with the right culture. And I think he's coming along. And, it's like anything else. If he catches 2 balls and they win games, maybe he goes home at night and says in the mirror, I wish I was catching more balls, but he's never going to say it publicly, which he shouldn't, because you're winning games. And that's what they're doing right now.
Right. And he's very low key about things. So I couldn't even imagine, him going out in public saying all that. And just real quick, I mean, you talked about Trey McBride being the number one option. I mean, even the statistics prove that he's leading the team in receptions with 49 and yards as well with 552. But I thought it was funny because he has 0 receiving touchdowns, but he has a rushing touchdown and then a fumble recovery for a touchdown. And so the way that he's been getting involved and you know, impacting this football team, I think it's phenomenal. Again, I have him on a bunch of fantasy teams. And so, you know, Trey McBride, keep doing your thing. Marvin Harrison, I don't have him on nearly as many teams. And so I'm not mad about that.
Yeah.
But Darren, I mean, as you know, time flies when you're having fun. I've had an absolute blast. Being able to chop it up with you again, I'd love to have you on the show sometime in the near future. Before I do let you go, though, I do want to give you the floor. Whatever you want to plug, any announcements, anything that's coming up, floor is yours.
Well, you can find all of my stuff on azcardinals.com. You know, obviously the Cardinals are a team that have struggled the last couple of years, but they do seem to be headed in the right direction. They're playing good football. It's going to be interesting after they come back from the bye. They get the Seahawks, as I'm sure you know, twice in 3 weeks, and I think that's going to go a long way in determining, you know, what their realistic chances are in the division. And I'm fascinated to see where this goes because I really think Jonathan Gannon has the team headed in the right direction. And if Kyler Murray keeps playing like this, I'll have a lot of good stuff to write about, to be honest.
Right. They're well ahead of schedule. Darren, thanks for your time. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And until next time.
Thanks for having me, bud.
Yes, sir. Peace. Right.